week, I'm speaking with Leonard Ng, who is a partner in the international law firm Sidley Austin, where he's worked for 24 years in New York, Singapore, and in the UK. Leonard is a member of Sidley Austin's executive committee, and he co-heads the UK-EU Financial Services Regulatory Group, advising global financial institutions on complex regulatory issues, including the regulatory framework established after the last financial crisis, Brexit, sustainable finance and ESG, and crypto asset regulation. Leonard is a past member of the Global Trade Association for Hedge Funds, a frequent speaker at industry conferences, and he's featured regularly in national and industry publications. Welcome to the business of being brilliant, Leonard.
Thanks so much, Helen, for inviting me. I don't know if I am brilliant, but I'll participate anyway.
Yeah, all our guests are brilliant. And we love hearing all the stories they share about their careers and their organisations. So I'm really glad you can join me. And I've given our listeners a very brief snapshot of your very successful and relatively long career. Is there something behind the official bio that might surprise people to learn about you?
Well, I think somewhere on the internet there's a photograph of me rehearsing with pop superstar Sia of Chandelier fame. Because some years ago, I used to, I'll tell you a bit more about my background, but when I first moved to London, I was very much a musician and playing the circuit and got in with a bunch of people, including Sia and some friends. And that was before she shot to superstardom and when she moved to LA, and it's a very successful career she's had.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's a great story to tell people. And I imagine your family and colleagues are pretty impressed by that bit of history.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you have got into your leadership role? How did you establish your career?
Well, I mean, as you said, I've been doing this for almost 25 years now, in fact. And I joined Sidley in 1997. And I think the way I think about my career has been always to just accept opportunities as they come along, accepting that there's no one perfect thing. And sometimes, the thing that you end up getting really good at and developing into might be very far away from the thing that you thought you wanted in the first place. I mean, when I grew up in Singapore, I did a law degree in Singapore. And at first I wanted to be an academic. And so I applied for an LLM program at Yale and the University of Chicago. I didn't get into Yale, but Chicago did give me an offer, and so I took that. But of course, having graduated, I thought, well, I've got a massive student loan in my head. I can't really be an academic. So I had developed an interest in telecoms law, and so I applied to Sidley, which had a great, strong telecoms practice, especially long history with, clients like AT&T. And so that sounded like a good idea to me. But I came to London and the telecoms practice was relatively small. And so I decided, well, they need me in structured finance, so I'll do structured finance instead. And after a few years, it was, well, actually, we think we need people to focus on regulation. So I said, that's fine, I'll do it. And so along the way, it's always been just saying yes to things, funnily enough. And I think when you do that, you open your eyes to new things that you weren't really thinking of at the time. Whereas if you have a very fixed view, or if you like tunnel vision of what you think you want, you actually don't end up exploring things that might be very good for you. Now, of course, it doesn't always work that way. I mean, not every yes to something results in something positive. But I'd say, in my experience at least, almost always there is something positive I can take away from saying yes to something. And the joke within Sidley is that, I'm like I show up the opening of an envelope in the sense I just say yes to everything and I participate in everything. And I always find something that's good from that thing, even if it didn't look apparent at the time. It might be 5 years later. Someone I met in an event I said yes to now becomes a client or asks me for help. And that's, I think, the way, well, that's how I've done it anyway. It doesn't mean it's the right way.
Yeah. That's so interesting. It sounds like you've been very happy to let your career evolve and be a little bit spontaneous about the direction it's going in. As you say, being very open to opportunities. And I love that mindset of just saying yes to things that, perhaps we often feel we're focusing too much on the plan we've got in front of us and we haven't got room to do other stuff. How do you balance that very open mindset with managing your energy and managing your time and not overstretching yourself? Because undoubtedly you play a very significant role in the firm, very busy with client work and managing colleagues and others. So how have you walked that line
I
over
think
the years?
it's not easy, obviously, and I think perhaps I have the benefit of obviously being a bit older and knowing, and as a young lawyer, I wasn't of the current world where you were tied to an iPhone or some other device 24 hours a day, and there were very fixed times at which you were at work and fixed times where you were not at work. So, for example, when I was a junior associate at Sidley, I had not a few evenings free. We worked pretty hard, but the point is, when you were outside of the office, you were actually your own person, and I was a musician outside of that, and I was doing other things. That doesn't exist today, and I think the way I manage it today is to think about those times when I did have that structure, and if I were to give advice, if anyone would listen to me, would be to try and replicate those structures, to try and have discipline. And it's ironic because lawyers are generally, pretty disciplined bunch of people, right? But we need to set those disciplines to our personal lives as well, to actually say, no, I'm going to put the phone down, or I'm going to have dinner with my family. I'm going to do something which will help me take my mind off the incessant work that's always there, because the nature of the beast, so to speak, is that it's always there. And if you don't draw some boundaries, you won't actually perform as well as you think you might. At some point, you will burn out. And I think at the levels we're playing at, if you're in Sidley is one of the largest firms in the world. I mean, certainly the top 10 or top 15. At these levels, you're almost like an Olympian. Every small thing makes a difference. If you added 5 grams to Usain Bolt's right shoe, he'd notice that. If you added a 1 or 2 degree shift to the balance beam, Simone Biles would feel that. And same for us. We're very, very finely tuned, but we have a huge, they have a huge team, and you've got to recognize you need a team around you to do this. So I think setting structures for yourself, having the discipline to set those structures, but also accepting help from other people is really the only way to do it. Because I don't know how, quite frankly, young people today are able to manage all this without having serious, mental health issues. And when, big study last year, 70% of lawyers, solicitors in this country have had some mental health event. I have had one. It's not unusual.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I too remember a time when early in my career we could switch off when we left the office and when we went on holiday, and genuinely not expect to have to do any significant amount of work or even to be contactable. And that's changed so fast in the last 10, 15 years. And it is worrying how normal it feels now for so many people to just be contactable and available to their employer, in the evenings, at weekends, and on holidays. And I totally agree with you that part of that, managing that healthfully, is for us to think about how we want to spend our time, what really matters to us, and be quite intentional about that and put some boundaries in place and structures. But I'm also interested in your comment that this is a kind of beast, our world of work. It's always churning away. It's always demanding things from us. What's your view on individuals managing that with their own boundaries, but also how we help within organizations create better habits and structures that work for everybody, rather than just leaving it to the individual to push back against that tide?
Yeah, I think that's important. And look, we're a big law firm. We serve our clients, and you asked earlier about how I came to this point in my career. It's because I really serve my clients well, because I try to, and I'm always available to them. I'm always, on call, so to speak. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite, so to speak, to say that, well, set boundaries, but I don't seem to set many boundaries myself. But at least I'm conscious of them. I think having that consciousness, and having a firm that says to people, listen, you need to understand that, yes, the work is really important, but actually, I used to joke with a couple of my associates, you have to go and exercise, you have to do this, you have to clear your head. So I think that push from the environment around you is important. Last year we had I think really for the first time, a real focus on trying to let people know that mental health issues were important. Four of us as partners shared with everyone on Zoom what our own experiences, just to try and normalize that. And, to be clear, I am very demanding of my team too, and myself, of course. So if I'm very demanding of myself, yes, I will be one of those people that might send an email very late at night to someone on my team. But I think it's important for them to realize that they don't always have to respond that time, unless I say, look, this is really urgent. That's fine.
Yeah.
But many things are just done, and you need to say, that's fine, I'll look at it in the morning. And, I try to remind people that's okay. You have to try and find that balance, because sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes you do have to respond. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast.
Yes. Yes. And of course, with more flexible and remote working and work becoming less synchronous, it often suits people to be, checking their emails, sending them late at night, because maybe that's for them some quiet, productive time that works best in terms of, their how their day pans out. But I think, as you're saying, it's so good to have those very open conversations about, I might be doing that, but unless I explicitly say so, I'm not expecting a response, and to make sure that that's very transparent. Yeah. So how do you talked a little bit about how you help coach others around making best use of their time. Are there any other particular habits that you've adopted over the years, or challenges you've encountered that have led to the way you manage your time as a senior leader today?
I would say there's no perfect way to do this, and everyone has their own style. I tend to work very long hours, but on the other hand, I try to leave my weekends completely free wherever possible. So I try to draw some boundaries around that. I try to have some time, not every day, but when I can, to try and do a bit of meditation. I certainly try to exercise as regularly as I can. And sometimes it's incorporating exercise into your daily commute, cycling to work, or, in my case, sometimes running to the tube station on either end. And if you have, 4 of those runs, that's, it's a decent short run for a day. And making these little adjustments actually makes a big difference, I find, because it is very easy as lawyers who work long hours to, take a tube to work in the morning and then, leave late at night in a taxi and come back and you've just been sitting down the whole day. Yeah. I think having that is very important. Clearing your head, having something outside of work, and it could be any kind of hobby. It could be, in my case, it's music, it's rock climbing. One of my associates does pottery, because that, again, it's something that helps you focus on the thing you're doing at the expense of everything else. In the case of pottery, if you're not focused on it, that thing's going to come out pretty horrible. In the case of, rock climbing, if you're not focused on that, you might slip and fall. And although you're safe, if you have a rope, there's always that 1% risk that the rope wasn't tied properly. So you have to focus. And so doing those, or skiing is a good example. You have to focus on that thing, and that's very different from, going surfing the internet when you're free, because that doesn't really take your mind off. It's the same activity you've been doing all day, sitting in front of a computer, looking at things and information. So information overload is very important to try and manage.
Yes, that's so true. And are there things you do collectively in your organization that are based around interests and hobbies? I know you're into music. Do you just leave it for time outside of work, or do you do it together with colleagues sometimes?
Well, we try to strike a balance. I mean, the reality is, and especially in the current environment, the last 2 years through the pandemic, big law firms have been extremely busy. And so the reality is, I'd be lying if I told you that we had some kind of wonderful, perfect balance where, every month we go out and do something together. It doesn't happen very often. But what we try to do is to put something in the diary, having a group event, just to get outside of the office and do something together. And of course, now that we're more or less back in the office, albeit today I'm actually at home, that flexibility has been good, I think, for people, but also coming together is equally important, because you learn from being, again, my original point, you learn from being open to other people. If you're not interacting with other people, you don't get new ideas. And honestly, it's quite hard to do that purely on a Zoom call, because what happens is, we like to say that it's the things that happen in between the meetings that are almost as important as the meetings themselves. That little 5-second conversation, chance meeting you have on the way to the lift, or in the pantry, or those things are very important. I think we need to create that kind of structure again. So trying to get back to the rhythm of having events that you plan for and attend. So for example, I chair our London diversity committee, and what we try to do is have something in the diary every quarter. We will have an event. It's in there. We're going to show up. We're going to have some fun. You try to do that because it then puts a structure, to my point earlier, about something outside of just doing the work. In this July, for example, our firm is having something called the European Lawyers Conference, where all the lawyers in Europe and our European offices will come together in London for an offsite. We're going to sit together, we're going to brainstorm and think about the strategy of the firm and how we can best execute that. And one of the things we're going to do is put on a big show, a big music show, and I'm responsible for that. And so again, that's nice because it forces people to think outside of their sitting in front of the screen replying to emails. They're answerable to me now as the band leader to rehearse and to learn some parts. And I think the nice thing about that will be that, hopefully, fingers crossed, you get on stage and all your colleagues are looking at you going, wow, you tried to do something for us. And that kind of camaraderie can't be bought. You can't pay people and obtain that kind of togetherness, that kind of feeling of actually being invested in something. If someone has spent hours and hours rehearsing to put on this big concert, people know it. I mean, certainly the people who are doing it know it, but everyone else knows it. Everyone else appreciates that. Yeah. I think that, again, as you know, the legal industry right now is very busy, and law firms are really paying huge amounts of money to attract and retain associates. But if the law firm simply becomes a number to a lawyer, then when the slightly bigger number comes along, that lawyer is going to go somewhere else. So having things that give you a reason for being there are important. I've been at the firm for almost 25 years now. And the reason I haven't left, regulation has been very fashionable for the last, 10, 12 years. And I could have gone anywhere. The reason I haven't left is because I, quite frankly, just like the people. I like the people I work with. I like the culture of the firm. And so developing a culture that's independent of the work you do and independent of, the salary you're paid is actually critical to developing an organization that feels that it's moving in the same direction and where people are respected for what they do.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And you make some really great points there. And I love hearing about the play that you're preparing to put on. And I think that's a wonderful example of how, as you say, people will take notice that colleagues have invested their own time and effort to create something enjoyable and fun and an opportunity to come together and celebrate whatever that is that you're celebrating together. And I think that is a really challenging thing for fast-paced, busy industries like the law, where time is measured on daily timesheets and accounted for rigorously throughout every day. Yeah. To what extent can organizations show that they value time for social connections, time for building those human relationships that aren't task focused? It's not just around a task or a piece of work or a piece of client work. I think that absolutely is essential to creating, as you say, that culture of belonging, of a shared community, that you get something else from work aside from a good pay packet and career advancement and interesting work. That's something else that people really need and value, isn't it?
It is. And that's why the culture of the firm is so important. We've been hiring, laterally as partners, not from other firms. And one partner said, in my firm, my former firm, the head of the firm would famously say, everyone has a price. And he said it was a pretty awful way to think about it, because it simply means you are a number to the firm. Now, of course, we all are numbers to the firm, right? We're here to generate revenue for the firm. And literally, that's our job. But you also spend 12, 15 hours a day at this job. And you try to do this for 30 years. You're going to fall apart if you are just a number. So, when I was thinking about our structure going back 10 years, 20 years, it was very much about producing a billable hour, right? Lawyers charge by the hour. So the only way to get more billable hours is to do more hours. It was very binary. But you begin to discover that if you only run a firm that way, then there's no particular reason, to my earlier point, for a lawyer to stay there if another firm is going to give them just a little bit more money, because it just becomes a race to the bottom, so to speak, in terms of who's going to, or race to the top, I suppose, who's going to pay you the extra, couple of £1,000 that will make it worth your while to move. If that's your only value to the firm, then it's kind of pointless, which is why we actually changed the way we remunerate people. When people are doing pro bono work, when people are doing certain business development activities or some other activities that are valuable to the firm's culture, I don't know, helping recruit people. These are not billable tasks, but we have to set aside, if you like, some of our pot to recognize people for those things. And even as partners, it is in some firms very much what you might call a eat what you kill culture, right? So you bring in this client, you're responsible for X amount of billings from that client, and then you look at yourself and say, well, if I should take X% of that, it becomes very, very binary. In ours, we try not to do that. Of course, we still have to recognize that people are paid literally to go out and generate business. That's really important. But equally, we ask people, well, what have you done for other people? In other words, have you only just looked after your own business and your own book, or have you created opportunities for other partners and other parts of the firm? Because that way the firm grows as a whole, because it isn't a zero sum. The economy, well, hopefully the economy is growing most of the time, unless you're going through recessions, but generally speaking, the economy is growing, which means the pie is always getting a little bit bigger each time. It's not a zero sum game where if I share this work with a partner in another group, it means I have less for myself. It actually doesn't actually work that way, because if you share that work and you involve other people, then the firm as a whole gets better at it. And as a firm, we've been increasing our revenue every year for the last, certainly since the last financial crisis. And just to illustrate that point, and you don't get that unless you reward people for involving other parts of the firm and not just being a bunch of sole proprietors.
Yes, I think that's so true. And I definitely hearing from lots of different conversations, there's much more of a shift now towards that more collectivism or collectivist approach, where people are kind of measured and rewarded not just on the numbers and not just on their own individual performance, but actually how they've helped support others and contribute to non-financial activities, as you say, that are equally important and valued by the organisations. It's really interesting to hear how you're describing that within, the world of law, which has, as I understand it, adopted has always had a fairly traditional commercial model around time, billing time and stuff. So it's interesting to see how you're exploring that and pushing the boundaries of that a little bit differently around what you reward people for.
If you reward people only by the amount of business they bring in, then culturally it might not be very attractive, at least from my perspective, to work. If you convince people, and people believe you, of course, that's important. If people believe that you're actually rewarding everyone fairly and on the basis not just of a number next to their name, but also what are they doing for other people in the firm? What are they doing for the firm's culture? Then I think you create something which will hopefully be more sustainable than something which is purely numbers driven. Because again, if the numbers start to drop, people will start to leave simply because the numbers are the only metric by which they value their time at the firm.
Yeah. So it becomes a really important aspect of your retention strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there a particular resource, a book or a video or a talk or anything that's been really helpful to you at certain points in your career that you would recommend to any of our listeners?
I've got to be honest with you. I've not been much of a reader of, management that I lie. There was actually one book that we were given last year called Smart Collaboration. I don't remember the name of the author now. You can look it up, obviously. But that was not last year, 3 years ago, because time flies. But that was given to us as part of one of these gatherings. So we're just sitting around thinking about collaboration, because how do you develop an organization that collaborates? How do you reward people in a way that encourages collaboration? that was actually quite useful because I've been given over the years many books, management books and stuff like that. And I flick through them and quite often they seem to be saying quite obvious things. So I just put them aside. I thought that one was actually quite good in the way of being a bit more detailed because it's very easy to write a fluffy book that, that just says all kinds of nice sounding things, but actually doesn't go into the detail of how you achieve those things.
Yes.
And I know you've written a book, which I haven't read yet, I'm afraid, but I will. Because I think, it's something that's actually very close to my heart, this whole subject of effective leadership and trying to be brilliant. We all lawyers in the nature of our job do try to be just that bit better each time.
Yeah.
And I say to my trainees, look, I'm still learning stuff. There's still mistakes that I make today. And, it's how to be a better human in a sense. And the last thing I was going to say actually is that, I like to think of the group that I work with, and I can't speak for every group in the firm, but certainly in my group, I like to think we're a bit of a family, right? So there are going to be days when every family has their family squabbles. Sometimes the sister's going to scream at the brother, the father's going to scream at the mother, and, because it's a family. And the important thing is you realize that that's not done maliciously. It's done in the heat of a moment. And you need to apologize for it and you move on. Like any, family out there, every family has their own problems and you have to try and solve it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Particularly when we're spending so many hours a day in one another's company, virtually or in person, it's very much, like family relationships, isn't it? And you may get on more or less with different colleagues or have moments of stresses. And I think so true to just think about in your career and at whatever stage you are, from the beginning to mid-career to leadership levels and late stage career, it's not just about your expertise and how you demonstrate that, but it's about the way you are with other people and the values you live and demonstrate in your conversations and your behaviors. And I think the more that organizations are attentive to that side of things, as well as the work, the numbers, the intellectual capital, the more people will find they're in workplaces where they can flourish really genuinely, regardless of their background or profile or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, I don't speak for the firm. Obviously, we have a big management structure. I can only talk about this from a personal perspective and how I've done this. I'm sure every other partner out there in my seniority will have their own story. So I hope this has been helpful in some way.
Yeah. No, well, thank you so much for sharing that. And how can listeners connect with you after the podcast if they'd like to get in touch professionally?
Oh, well, I think if you just Google, Leonard Ng at Sidley, you'll come up with my Sidley page or my LinkedIn page, and always happy to connect with people.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I will put some links to your organisation and the book you mentioned in the show notes as well, so people can access those easily. So thank you so much for joining me today, Leonard, and talking about your career and Sidley Austin and the things you're doing there to create a really inclusive, high-performing organisation. It's been wonderful to hear your stories, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. It's been brilliant having you as my guest.
Thank you so much.